Well, let's start. Hope you can all hear me. So good evening, everyone. My name is Susanne. I'm from Informaat, and I'm also a member of the Dutch SDN team, and I'll be hosting tonight's meetup. This event is in conjunction with the SDN or Service Design Day, which took place yesterday. If you're interested in all kinds of special offers like tutorials, like discounts for students and so on, please check out your mail. You should have received a mail yesterday, I think, by Jessie Grimes or by SDN. And if you haven't, please check out the SDN website where they're also listed. Tonight's topic is about futures design, or future probing, as the speakers like to call it. I guess we all service designers prefer to design services that last longer than only tomorrow. So the question is, what can you do to explicitly take those into account, those future needs and trends? That's what we'll be discussing tonight. The session will be a presentation, but we will also be using the Miro board, and we'll be sharing the link later via the chat. We'll be having a presentation of about 45 minutes and then a 20 minutes walkthrough through the Miro board. So after the presentation, we'll have a short Q&A, and after the complete presentation, we'll have a longer Q&A session of about 30 minutes. If you have any questions during the presentation, please post them via the chat, and we'll pick the questions and answer them either in between or afterwards. Our program lasts officially until 8 o'clock, but if you like to stay a little longer or discuss in more detail, we can extend it until like 8:30. We'll be recording the meetup. We're already recording the meetups, and we'll be sharing the link of the recording later via Meetup. So let me briefly introduce the speakers and then quickly hand over to them. Our first speaker is Slava Kozlov. He's a co-founder and director of Summ. And Summ is a partnership of practitioners who strive to create the new. They guide and support strategic innovation projects. And before Summ, Slava worked with the strategic design team of Philips Design, also here in the Netherlands. And we have another presenter and facilitator, which is Katerina Khomenchuk. And she's also a co-founder of Summ. But in addition, she's a communication professional with a focus on new cross-platform communication. And she's helped numerous companies in shaping their new communication strategies, leading to positive change in organizational cultures. So that's for my part. I would say Slava and Katerina, please go ahead. Sharing, giving the screen to you. Let me see.
And sharing the screen, yeah.
Yes.
So thank you very much. Yes, I think I will also kind of immediately jump to the screen. I hope you see it. Well, again, thank you very much for, well, first of all, for invitation to share our experience and expertise with the network, and specifically to Susanne, thank you for support, all the efforts to make it happen. It was, we took some effort to organize, to kind of go through the materials and to decide what to present and how to present. So indeed, our talk today will be about future probing. It's a method we developed and practice, and we'd like to share our expertise, what we do, how we do it. And already, as Susanne mentioned, it's quite a kind of complex program, consisted of multiple parts. I think I'll show you if, yeah, that's slide which is explaining. So again, the fundamental focus will be on the future probing, the method, and its different whys and hows and what we do, and specifically how. But I'd like to also mention why we do that. It may be obvious, like as Susanne mentioned, everybody wants to be able to deal with the future, but there are a few tricks and issues with that, which is the famous F word, the future. So we'd like to also share a bit of why we do it as someone, why our clients are doing it, and why perhaps it's interesting for SDN, and that's perhaps will be already in a discussion with you. I would like to mention that maybe some new whys appeared. We're doing it in a very strange time in this whole crisis, and it have implication for, well, technicalities. For example, we're doing it online, and we have to also think about how to do the future probing online and so on. But also maybe it's sort of other new whys emerging, and I'd like to touch that, perhaps also in a Q&A session. And as already was mentioned, we'd like to bring this real experience for you to have a kind of tangible feeling. Okay, not of course full-scale method in this whole future probing session, but at least have some kind of a understanding how it may go, especially in the current conditions. So it's a bit of a resemble the Matryoshka doll of Russian, this doll, not necessarily linear. So we'll be jumping from this Y to house and so on. We'll see how it goes. So I think maybe just a few words about us. It was presented indeed, we are practitioners. I can give you later sort of some figures and like who are we exactly, what we do. But I think it's maybe important to mention that's our slogan. We always say, we summon the future, the futures, to play with them now. That's the kind of our motto. And I often say that to explain what we do, I have to explain every word in this motto, and then you will understand everything. I think the most sort of maybe strange words for you, it's the word summon. What is summon? So summon, I think there are many people from the Netherlands here, it's maybe translation of this oproepen. Basically, we're calling the future. We're helping people to call the future, to experience it and to see that. Well, usually it's sort of a skill of Tovenars, the mages. And it's like this Dumbledore's and Gandalf's appropriate figures. In fact, what Dumbledore was doing this Hogwarts school, that he was summoning this famous dinner for the students. But I think that's also a bit of a clear, hope it's getting this clear what we're doing, but I think it's also a bit of a misleading because people tend to associate this figure of the summoner with one particular powerful mage. In reality, the word summon only happened as a collaborative ritual. So only basically he was able to summon this food because everybody wanted to eat. So in the same way, we're summoning the future because you want to see that. We cannot do it alone. So that's perhaps we are different from classical sort of trend watchers and different sort of forecasters who tell you the future. We have to summon it together. And that's sort of this collaborative nature is very important for us. And another important issue that summon is often presented as a sort of ritual of conjuring something, creating. In reality, what summon is about is to making holes. It's making kind of a gap in the current, because for the new to appear, you have to destroy the old. And then that is also sort of our activities to help people to kind of get rid of some old cliches, not necessarily destroying the physically things, but maybe destroying your old ideas and old cliches. So in nutshell, those are three words that are very essential for someone in general, but specifically also for future probing. So it's a collaborative, it's critical, and most importantly, self-critical, and it's creative. And I will show you these three qualities that right now they may sound very abstract, but I'll try to show what they mean in classical, sorry, in a full sort of spectrum of summon activities. Basically, again, as I said, today we'll be doing mostly future probing part, but maybe worth mentioning, it's only part of what we do as Summon. Summon indeed is a team of practitioners. We helping companies to ideate, to innovate, to come up with new ideas, new solutions. But exploring the future only part of what we do. There are two other important wings, like we help companies to understand people, basically to understand the now, and people for us, it's broader than just consumers or customers. It's also understanding the context of, for example, business to business operation and so on. And that I assume for many of you is quite familiar. I shouldn't spend too much time explaining how do we work together with people, trying to understand the context and then enrich our design solutions or creative solutions with this knowledge. Maybe somewhat strange for you is transforming. So some of you may be involved in this sort of change management program. So we try to do this helping people to change themselves, because future is not only future product, it's future us. And then to kind of experience that, we need to have also special tools. In our case, for example, we develop like a number of serious games and other ways to help people to play with this own, sort of to change their mindset. It shouldn't be understood as a process like doing A, then B, then C. It's actually all together should be done kind of in a holistic way. But today our focus is not in all complexity. We're talking about this future probing. So, and before I will go and jump to the sort of specific explanation, I'd like to maybe stop a little bit on this whole concept of future. What is future? Why it's so difficult to deal? As Susanne mentioned, I Now we are running Summ for almost 10 years, and before that I was working for 10 years in field of design, and before that I also was involved in a number of projects. So it's like soon to be 25 years of in one way or another dealing with this future world, future projects. So I can share my expertise or experience. What is actually the whole key issue of this things? It's very now, you see the very simplistic kind of representation. The now is what we know today, what is our world, with our worldview. And when we think about the future, all my experience show that we tend to do this way. We think the future will be like now, but maybe, you know, bigger, better, brighter, and so on. That's perhaps, if I summarize, that's a typical and most common mistakes of our attitude toward the future. We basically project the now to the future. You may disagree with this picture because they say, no, we know, of course, we're reading a lot, we're hearing a lot about this innovation and sort of the future trends and so on. So that's not quite right. So in a way, you're right. That's a more correct picture. Of course, we know that the future will be populated by robots and, you know, flying cars and artificial intelligence. We eagerly populate it with all the kind of candidates, how the future will be, you know, many new, novel, fantastic things will appear. Not only technology, for example, we think that, you know, all the sustainability goals will be achieved. And I think the next slide shows that all the coronavirus will be defeated, hopefully. But somehow underneath, this projection is still happening. And well, it's still maybe too abstract for you, and I'll try to illustrate it with one example. This example is from the very old project. I can bring it from the new project, from our project, but it's a bit of a sensitive. But this is a very old project known in the field of future studies. It's basically what you see. It's how people in 1900, so more than 100 years ago, they imagined the world of 2000. In this particular case, the picture may look a bit cartoonish, like child, you know, illustration, but it wasn't actually. It was quite a serious project. The author of this, Jean-Marc Cotet from France, he, as typically, he interviewed scientists, experts, and so on, and he compiled these visions of the possible futures. And it was altogether maybe about 50, 60 of such snippets presenting different sort of life in the future, life in 2000. In this particular case, you see the room of the future, the classroom of the future, right? So it's a school of the future. As you could see, it's fundamentally centered about one device, this sort of apparat that basically the teacher putting the books, and they're somehow magically electrified and then beamed to the brains of the pupils. We can laugh about that, say that's definitely wrong. That's not how we study it, and then didn't happen. So that's, in principle, we can discard it as sort of naive. On a maybe secondary reflection, we can say, well, we know that the loss of developments in cognitive sciences and sort of even like this brain-to-computer interfaces, brain-to-brain interfaces, Mr. Musk is promising to put the chip in all our brain very soon. So maybe these guys were not quite wrong. They may be just a bit too early. On the other side, if you interpret this previous picture and not so literally, kind of not necessarily beaming to your brain, but basically kind of other ways to using technology in education. For example, we all, by now, many of you sitting in headsets, so in a way information is pouring to your ears. And of course, we're experimenting with this virtual reality and other devices and so on, like this Zoom. It's fantastic technology. So education is indeed sort of heavily mediated by different devices, electronic devices, and so on. So maybe actually we're already living in this world that they predicted. And for us, that's important consideration that we don't discard them, but somehow they all remain on one level. This will be this technology or this technology and so on. And I would invite you to look at this picture one more time. And well, usually I'm doing it interactively. So I invite the audience to say me what's so strange about this picture, what's maybe even weird, and even at some point insulting about this picture for us living today. I guess I don't have much chance to kind of see the response of the audience. Usually a female voice helps, because what you see here, it's the only boys in the class, right? There are no girls in this classroom. And of course, for us, it should be insulting. But for those people, it was norm, right? So indeed, the education was segregated and girls were not sitting in one classroom with the boys. And as we know, they also had shorter programs and they were not able to go to colleges and so on. So basically, that's what I mean. For these people, this kind of peculiarity of education was a norm. They couldn't expect it. Therefore, they easily projected to the future. So, and that's fundamentally for us a big obstacle. It's not how to, predict or forecast how is extra new technology will be popping up, but really imagine what are the strange and unusual changes that may contradict to our contemporary norms and values they may emerge. So if I kind of present it in a very abstract way, like this is how the development's happening, certain process, and we tend to think about the future in this way. Of course, we know the future could be different. We kind of think about different scenarios and so on. But we tend to project the current things, the current flow. And then when the new reality comes, and this quote from the French poet Paul Valéry, that the future is not what it used to be. We thought about the future in this way, and it happens to be completely different. In a way, this picture is very pessimistic. So usually I say, thank you very much. My presentation is over, because there's no way for you, if you're sitting in the left world, to really imagine what will happen to strange right world. So we can, and this humbleness should be staying, that it's indeed very difficult to imagine the future, which is so different from us. Some sort of line of hope maybe come from another famous thinker and writer, William Gibson. You may know this quote: "The future is already here. It's not just very evenly distributed." And some people interpret this sentence, this famous quote, as the future may be kind of concentrated in some pockets, like, the Silicon Valley or these days China. You go to China and see the future. I think we treat it differently. The future, basically, it's already somehow between us or among us. We just don't notice it necessarily. If I go back in a second to this picture, which I showed before, this right strange world didn't start immediately. It didn't start in one go. It started step by step, first maybe through the strange small dents and deviations and small, disturbances of this curve that becoming increasingly, and then resulted in a very different situation. So our task in this future probing is to start spotting these changes earlier. That's, if you say philosophically or sort of methodologically, that's a whole future probing what it's all about, is to how to train ourselves to spot those sort of possible first changes first and earlier than your competitors, for example. If I actually, just to make it again tangible, if I go back to this picture, if we now, with the hindsight, we see that right now, in this very moment, in the beginning of 20th century, there was a lot of signals showing that the situation with the women and society will be different. Like suffragist movement was there, women were entering science, making sort of a way to the sort of classical male profession and so on. But they were all these things were kind of strangely marginal. They were all, laughable, sometimes even illegal. We forget that suffragists were actually arrested for their activities. So, and people tend to ignore them, and they didn't consider them. They were all kind of marginal, deviant things. And yet, if you would pay attention, you could actually guess what the future is emerging, what kind of future is coming. So that's basically kind of a introduction to the method of future probing. So future probing is our effort to help people to spot those changes earlier, what we call spotting these future signals, and then making sense of them, how we together can sense what they're talking about, or they're telling us, because obviously not every strange, exceptional developments will be talking about the future. And then after this, we kind of make sense of that, explore that together, and to see, maybe probe the future. So I will explain you all these stages of the future probing in sort of more details in the next few slides. I think the very first one, I will maybe just pay a little bit attention to the future signals. Maybe it's a paradoxical, but future signal is not the trend, is not the sort of projection of what the future will be. It's actually something that happens already now. It's maybe a new development in certain industry or domain or sort of area that in some way it's obviously new, maybe one of the recent ones, but it's also kind of strange and unusual. In some way or another, it's typical, it's different from the mainstream, from the sort of from the common realities. And this we're looking for this exceptional developments. And also because we believe that some of them could be a norm of tomorrow, not all, but at least some of them could be. In fact, every future at some point eventually was exceptional in the past. And then I will explain you that we are looking for the things and we developing them not just randomly, but we focus on certain domain. And that's, I will explain you in a sort of next few slides what we mean by domain. So when we do this future probing, we, together with the clients, define number of areas. Usually we start from the core that's actually related to the business of the clients or the business or particular project or particular point of interest. So we define this as a core domain and collect those future signals from the core domains. But we never stop here. We also adding other domains. For example, that the one that can impact your business or it can influence your business, or maybe providing this social cultural context. I'll try to explain this sort of abstract scheme with a few examples. For example, we work with the company that it's a large glass manufacturer, and they making the glass for the cars. It's automotive. So their core business is this kind of things, windshields or any glass for the cars. Obviously, that's a core, but what is impacting them? It's of course automotive industry. Right, and then maybe city urbanism, the developments in the city, sort of city mobilities will be definitely not directly, but influencing these decisions. And broadly speaking, the sort of changes in our lifestyle related to mobility, it would provide social cultural context. That would be typical example of our sort of thing, but it's not necessarily only product related. For example, for the very same company, we also did almost like parallel exercise, where this definition of the core impact and influence was very different. They are not only making this sort of particular glasses, but also they're interacting, they're selling them to their customers, to the automotive companies. So for them, they're one of the key aspects of this client relationship, CRM. And if you put this in the core, some other things will be impacting this. For example, development in IT, sort of the new business model that are emerging in the world. And broadly speaking, the shift, for example, what you many very, very aware, sort of shift from product to services, and the sort of changes of the attitude to the ownership versus having, own things versus having access. That will be their very, very sort of different domains. And that we discussed with clients. So one of the first steps between the future probing is to define this sort of this ensemble of those areas. I will illustrate it. It's just one example. One of the recent project was about this new sustainable energy, one new energy company. So they knew something, they knew lots about energy, but sort of mainstream. And what we see, for example, typical case of a few kind of signals of the future, new, unusual, strange development related to the new sources of energy. It could be technological, it could be geography-wise, it could have application-wise. That's a typical things. And it's important that sort of the signals are not just randomly collected, they are domain specific. And then, but it's more than just information that we gathered for them. We also go together. That's back to sort of our collaborative nature. What you see, it's a typical scenes from the workshops or sessions we do. People go through the signals together. They discuss what they see from details from the sort of bigger picture. They kind of deconstruct the signals together, trying to understand what makes them, what making them off, what making them exceptional, what exactly we are sort of find them strange. And then what you see also from the discussion of the individual signals, we also, as a team, try to understand what the sort of, that's difficult to explain, common uncommonalities. Obviously, because they're all from one domain, they're common in some sense. Like, for example, the previous one was, they're all about energy. But we tried for every signal, if we see what is make us strange and unusual, but maybe also some this unusualnesses are kind of also common. Maybe some kind of a common threads in what makes them different. So you see on the right side the typical sort of moment of analysis when we kind of populate the signals, but we try in the center to find those common threads of these unusual qualities. That's not easy because usually every project, every signal has its own sort of peculiarities and vocabulary. So therefore, we're basically helping each other to sort of to formulate what it makes them sort of this kind of common threads could be spotted. And as I said, it's not only for one domain, so we're doing it for multiple domains. That's another picture from the workshop. I kind of apologize, I have to kind of blur the faces, which makes this maybe strange for you, but we're taking pictures from the workshop, but we're promising people not to reveal their identities. But the moment of the workshop showing this analysis of the three domains. You see here 3 similar posters, each of them was related to specific domains in this particular workshops. And then on top of that, we try to understand what's common between all 3. So I'll show you maybe another picture from the, this is this case of the 4 domains. You see the quadrant, and in the center, try to understand kind of meta common things. It's a kind of common uncommonalities between different domains. That's usually people complaining that the brain was melting. So it's very tough intellectually. So therefore, it's we're helping each other to kind of even sometimes formulate what the sort of those qualities could be. It's always sort of almost looking for new words and how to do that. So, but it's a kind of at the end, it's very rewarding because people kind of have this feeling of almost being in the future, sensing the future. And then also maybe you could notice it's quite space demanding. So that's again typical picture of the workshop. And then you see it's almost like a thinking room. So basically it's a space populated by information, also kind of insights and so on. So that's kind of very typical situation. On all these pictures, you don't see us, you don't see me because I'm taking the picture, but in reality, we're not just facilitating, we are actively participating in these things. In some cases, and I will explain this later, we present this future signals. In some cases, they're done together. Some people from the participants, from the companies or the organizations, they develop their own future signals. So we also kind of, for us, it's a big learning opportunity. We're learning their ideas about, but we are actively participating. That's exactly this we're doing it together. We're not just, moderating the workshop in terms of the timekeeping. And then at this stage, what this sort of result of that is something of this sort, which is basically, you see the sort of typical quadrant, the 4 domains, and in the middle, you see the sort of essence of this, like those kind of insights, what those uncommon for covering all 4 domains. I deliberately blurred it because it's very, very sensitive. Usually it's a big development for the company, big achievement for the team, because that's your guesses about the future. That's what you, sort of your almost insights, what the future direction could be. And yeah, that's actually quite critical for a company to often keep it kind of confidential and secret, because that's a kind of competitive advantage. You also notice that's very abstract, right? So usually it's like really strange words, not quite comprehensible because it's lots of, it's a complexity of expressing this also very, very present. So sometimes it's almost metaphorically but in any case, it's very, very abstract, as you just noticed, obviously. So our next step is basically help people to make it tangible, this first concept. And that's what we do through what we called building the future world. So from the first future glimpses, it could be very abstract and sort of, difficult to even comprehend if you haven't participated in these discussions. We try to make this sort of tangible and really kind of amplified. For example, we take one quality and try and help people to imagine the world where this particular quality is like everywhere. It's become mainstream. So the things what we now see exceptional, what if it will become the mainstream quality of the world? How this world will operate? What will happen in this world? What are new things? What are new interaction with people? And what's the new social practices may emerge? So it's like from one abstract idea to make it very, very, tangible and sort of, holistic as a world building. This activity, I guess lots of people in the audience from design industry, that's maybe easier for you. You feel much more comfortable with these materials and so on. Usually these exercises create lots of resistances from the audience, especially from like particular audiences like academia or, heavy head businesses like, senior management. Or engineers, by the way, so they say that's a silly, that's a toyish, and so on. And by the way, when doing this, we bring our sort of tools for this building kits. We deliberately don't make them toyish. For example, we don't like the Lego. I mean, we like Lego as such, but we try to avoid bringing this kind of explicitly toyish things for this sort of exercises. In fact, it's more like abstract, more ambiguous materials that help people to construct something, but not necessarily making this completely silly. We also see on some pictures that people also eagerly appropriate other things. They can easily see the bottles, for example. They just, very creatively start, using the environment or other objects and so on. So again, the experience shows from the first resistance, almost without an exception in every group, to sort of actually people remember this and value this kind of exercise most. And of course, the topic here is not to construct the accurate representation of the world. That's not the point. The point is that it helps people to create better stories. It helps people to create and sort of communicate interesting sort of novel sort of qualities of this world. I can show you just one example, which is maybe very, very silly for you. You wouldn't understand what it is. It's a strange, construction, really meaningless for you. For people who participated, in this particular case, it was energy companies in the States, in the United States, that's the future of American energy. I mean, at this moment you could laugh because it's a kind of means nothing. But for them, it was a way to express their story. It's a way to explain and somehow capture the essence of what they talk. I cannot tell you, of course, that, but also for me, it would be not easy to tell you the thing because you have to be participating and sort of, you know, meaning of each of those sort of strange string or the object would have certain meaning for these people, which is kind of not that easy to communicate for you. Well, therefore, the task is when it's done during the session, during the sort of exercises with people, the next task, the next step is actually to make it somewhat more explicit, somewhat more explainable. And this, for example, I can show you a couple of examples. We also help people to build more comprehensive. That's basically more sort of a, you know, classical, the vision of this is a future world, the world of the future, and one of the possible world where different sort of technologies, infrastructures, layers, and so on. But that's exactly the result. The previous stage was those strange figures. And it's not only about technologies, it's also, we discuss with, you know, what people do and how they interact with each other, with technology, with each other, what the new social practices could be. And that's, again, that's a usually very confidential materials. People, that's your kind of bet about the future. And that's a trick because if you went through this process and it's so immersive, you sort of touch the different signals, you kind of collectively interpret them. You almost like to say that I've seen the future, I've been to this world, it's becoming too believable. And this is also kind of actually, at any given moment, this is still remains to be hypothesis. It's our assumption of how the future could be. And so we have to keep testing that. We have to check this if it's really coming in these directions. So that's basically the next step, connect the step to the things. It's what we call the actually probing. The future probes are kind of representation of this possible future worlds. They're already popping up during the workshops. Like, for example, there could be some construction in this future world or some sketches. So sort of what are the examples of this future world? You could also at this moment come back to your core business and what your business will be doing in this future world, or maybe what your business will be in this future world. And you could express this idea in a variety of forms, through drawings, through storytelling, through some tangible artifacts. And that's already happening in the workshops. And after workshop, it's or after this sort of session and the process, it could be further refined. It could become the new concepts. It could become new qualities, which you could express sort of, you know, metaphorically, or it could become even a new proposition for your business. And then the question is, why you do that, and what for? It's have double purposes. It's both communication, so you could explain other people more clearly what's your assumption about this future world and how this would done. So it's a communication purpose, and communication could be directed to your own colleagues, to the peers, to the partners, to even then eventually to people, where your future customers. And the second one, this probing, is you try to elicit the feedback, what people think about that. That's a very different feedback from the classical user testing, because there's nothing, very often these things are not for this world. So you shouldn't talk like something like, do you like it, or do you see yourself using it? Very often people don't see, and they actually shouldn't like it because it doesn't belong to the world of today yet. But the kind of the task of saying, would you like to have this world, maybe checking the consistency, still it's very important to get this feedback. And also kind of checking this possible developments with people as a possibilities, they can do that. So that's also interesting things to kind of not to check, not to use it as a sort of getting like yes, no, like it or not like it. So, and then, okay, then basically I finished the sort of the arc from the future signals to the sort of thinking and creating the world to this future probes. And obviously, well, at this moment, I can maybe show you the picture of the dolphins, which is also, I think behind me is also the same picture. So usually, again, I usually ask the audience, like, what do you think, why dolphins here? I'm missing this sort of feedback loop. So hope we can at some point compensate it in the Q&A. But dolphins for us is almost mascot for this method. Again, not having your reaction, I can explain at least our logic. Dolphins obviously are very smart, also very, you know, social creatures. They comparable to humans in many, many ways. They also, for example, have the same sensors as us. They can hear, they can see, of course, and so on. But on top of everything, they have one extra sensor that we humans don't have. They have this sort of a sonar that provides them a chance to kind of, send the ultrasound beams. And ultrasounds travel very quickly in water and then reflected back by different objects. So basically, they're almost sensing ahead. And that makes them kind of unique creatures in the sea world. They can, for example, outcompete sharks, despite sharks are stronger than dolphins. And then they can, navigate very quickly, very easily in darker waters and so on. So really, really extra sort of magical qualities. And then if I summarize, and dolphins, by the way, are not known for this sort of once in a while strategic foresighting sessions. They keep doing it all the time. They keep sending signals. They keep spending some kind of efforts to sense what's ahead. And they're sending it not in the direction they sail, but also left and right and ups and downs. They're sensing much wider than they sort of the things. And that would also help them to sort of be this more sensorial, sort of more anticipating creatures. So in a way, this with our future probing, it's not us, showing you the trends, it's us making, or help, at least hopefully making you like a dolphin. We are kind of on a mission to dolphinize our clients, to make them or to transform them into much more anticipatory collectives. So that's a famous quote from David Bowie: "Tomorrow belongs to those who can hear it coming." I think it's important that he can mention Ofka being a musician, the hearing, this very sensorial thing. So in a sense, that's what our mission with this sort of tool and with this approach is partly, of course, delivering results, the insights, the concept, and so on. But it's very, very importantly, we also helping the teams to transform. They reach another level of collaboration and this collective anticipation of the possibilities. I showed you a number of pictures so far. You've seen lots of them, and they typically, I mentioned the workshop session and so on. It's a typical sort of format. Of course, we often start, and it's very important, of course, when we're physically together, when we talk to each other. That's of course quite essential for the thing. But also when we can collaborate. But it's not the only thing. It's actually, we'd love to have this, but we always say it's not the only format necessary and for this exercise. It is much more important not only do it during the specially organized workshops, which we prepare, run, and we enjoy, and people find them useful. We also try to, find, for example, special locations for them and so on to kind of detach people from the classical, the typical office environment. But it's also not enough to only focus on the workshop. So our sort of ideal format is sort of more longer journeys. When we first maybe do kind of rehearsal, when we show the tools, when we teach the basics, so we go through the basics, but then people gradually start doing it themselves along the way. So for example, it's not us sensing the signals and collecting the signals, but they do that. It's not only us creating this world with them, but they start doing this. And basically all the steps of the process, like step by step, they kind of learn how to do that. So eventually this journey that we do together, and that's a metaphor of the mountaineering. So we actually do it together. So we actually go to the summit, all of us carrying our own backpacks. But then after this journey, they're capable to do it themselves. And then that's what our fundamental result is about. And I think, as I mentioned, therefore, because of the sort of complexity and logistics, we used to have always, like in addition to the sort of physical offline sessions, we also use historically already for years sort of number of online tools. We use Mirror Board, which is before it would become Mirror Board, used to be called Real-Time Board. So people in kind of when the workshop is finished, we can then migrate to this Mirror Board and continue our activities. So I don't know, some of you may be familiar with the Mirror Boards. We will have a chance to kind of experience it and see this, how it works. But fundamentally, it's a kind of collaborative tools when people can create some content together, share content together, and also do it both synchronously, like when they simultaneously present, but also asynchronously, like you adding one piece of content and somebody else edit another one, and it's basically unfolding process, kind of ongoing process. So that's basically, we try to equip this in the best cases. Our future probing is a hybrid. It's a combination of offline and online. Now, of course, in the current world, as you see, offline is severely limited. So we, therefore, we actually started applying it, and we have experience already in the last few months as we have this experience of doing it completely offline. So we ran a few projects already when we do this future probing exercise with people we've never seen before in real life. Well, we've seen maybe some of them, but the majority of the people we only see this through the Zooms and Skypes and so on, and we only work with them through this sort of mirror boards. So that's sort of our perhaps next sort of stage. I would like to maybe at some point, I will send you the link in a second, so we will have a chance to see how the actual mirror board looks like and how we structure it and what we do with these things, and maybe what's sort of common features with a normal process, and what's the sort of specifics of this project, specific of this medium.
Slava, excuse
yes.
me. Do you want to, before we go to the mirror board, do you want us to pick out a few questions from the Q&A?
Yes, maybe exactly. That's yeah.
Maybe you can determine whether it's easier to answer them after.
Yeah, that's exactly my. Thank you, Susanne. That's exactly my next slide. So Q&A. So basically, we kind of. I'm done. I'm before my talking head. So I showed you the kind of essence, the bit of a what and hows and whys. It's maybe time to, before we just jump to the mirror boards, for you to react, reflect, and maybe fire some questions.
There are already some questions in the chat if you go there, but I can read them out loud to you.
Yeah, maybe it's
the one question from Darwin: are domains adjacent sectors or industry or topics to the core, or are they contrasts? So that, I think it was in the beginning of your talk when you talked about the
domain. They again, that's a good question. They try to create sort of more complex worlds. So basically, then as we said, we start from the core, but we're adding something that more or less impacting or can influence that. Some of them closer, and some we deliberately make very far. This creates lots of tensions because, for example, when we think that you have to pay attention to certain domain, lots of people in the business say, why? It's not related to my business at all. Why should I? And so on. So that's becoming quite a conflict. For example, you're doing manufacturing and we say you have to pay attention to contemporary art. What's the relationship? But yeah, for a number of reasons, we also know from our experience that some insights from this area may help you to think about this. So it's partly, there's a certain logic in including them, but there's also kind of irrationality. We believe basically everything is connected with everything else. So that's, yeah, that's, I don't know if you answer that. So there's some kind of adjacency, kind of they indeed logically connected to each other, but we also reserve the right to go a bit further than that.
Yeah. Okay, then there's another question. This looks cool, and this person is all in favor of designing better tools and methods. But what about what about how scientific this all is?
That's a question. That's a question will be then almost like reflecting back to your design, how scientific your design, how scientific your design thinking for that, or our design thinking. There are lots of things. Obviously, I can, just to kind of for record, I have a degree in sociology, so I can defend it sociologically. I know there's a theory that it would support this kind of activities, why the society develop in this way, why it's important to pay attention to this sort of signals. There's certain scientific methods. Although at the same time, we deliberately don't want to be the sort of classical scientific, otherwise you end up being, United Nations institution, covering everything comprehensively, collecting all the possible signals. There's also kind of some bit of opportunistic things. It's also pragmatic. We have to be like dolphins. They cannot sense everything possible. It's enough for you to be, confidently paving your way to the future. Therefore, for example, we consistently advise not to overdo that. For example, not to collect hundreds of signals. You will be swamping analyzing them. Not to do like 25 domains. Take 3, analyze. In the next round, because it's obviously iteration, that is kind of the accuracy of this tool comes from iterations. You have to keep doing this. And in the flow, you could also change your, the domains. You could try one and change other signals and learn how to pick up signals better, how to decipher them, how to deconstruct them better. So it's also kind of a skill-based things. Like dancing, for example, you just dance better if you dance more often.
Okay. There's another question. Have you seen a result of future probing from the past in the current time? how companies have pivoted or even new products or services that resulted from this process?
Yes, that's a very good question. We definitely, first of all, because we're doing it for a while already, we have our own examples. There's a kind of sensitivity here because very often, and that's a kind of problem with our profession, we often cannot do the how to say to share too much. Maybe I can do this thing. We cannot share too much because of the it's classical sensitivity, but actually there's a chance for us to, I actually prepared a couple of examples. I thought maybe to share them later, but I can show them now. They're both very known to the market by now, but they used to be secret like 5 years ago. So I mentioned this company we work, glass company. So we, like you could imagine, it's about 5-6 years ago, we made this exercise for them, and their classical things was a glass, how to make glass for cars, that's typical things. But based on our exercise, they start sensing kind of a couple of new developments. One was obviously the smart cars, so like with autonomous cars, which is now a big hype. It's still, we are waiting when they will come up, but 5 years ago, it wasn't so obviously present. But we kind of sense, thanks to this sort of tools and sensing the first signals, early signals, we kind of put it in their sort of roadmaps that they have to think about that. And they start thinking, and I cannot show you the previous iterations, but basically right now it's a ready product. The wide eye is what that's existing developments. They were first in the industry who made this. Basically, they made the glass, which is very fitting to LiDAR. LiDAR is a very integral part of the smart cars. It's a kind of an antenna which is sending the signals, laser. But it's the tricky things that you have to, if you put LiDAR outside of the car, it's okay, but it's very vulnerable. It could be broken, it's not working well. If you put it inside of the car, it's actually the glass prevents it going. So this guy's developed the glass that actually kind of helps, allows LiDAR signals to go through, which is very logical if you don't know what you are aiming at. But because they kind of sensed that this autonomous car can appear. They presented, like a couple of years ago, it was presented in Las Vegas, and it was quite a blast because they say, how do you know? How did you get it? So it's almost like unexpected. Somebody almost like visited the future. So of course, it's a very, very striking example for us. But the second one, it's actually maybe closer to your industry. We also spotted not only this one, we actually we discussed with them the sort of shift from the sort of a product to services and how you enable the service development through, for example, continuous loops of interaction with customers and systems through sensorial capacity, through the internet, the connectivity, and so on. They were triggered, and they develop entirely different sort of things. It's a glass that can sense its own state. For example, when it's broken, it can send signals, or even just before it's broken, the glass has very peculiar structure. So it can actually sense when it will be broken soon. And they actually installed this, and it's now interesting because they can provide the service to the car owners, but also car makers and many other, like insurance, for example. All of a sudden, the guys who never ever thought about anything remotely related to services, they were just making, pieces of product, entered the field of the services. Well, exactly because at some point they start sensing that's coming. So that's maybe exceptional signals, exceptional cases when I can show you the possibilities.
Maybe we have time for one more question before we move on to the Miro board. Is that okay with you, or can we have more questions? Whatever you like.
I don't. For some reason, I cannot see. Yeah, that's now I see. I kind of switch it. So I see lots of questions, but
yeah.
Yeah, I think kind of practicalities.
I think there was one question about. Oh yes, here. How long does a program run?
Yeah.
In which format? How does it affect the schedule? What are the types of companies that normally would greenlight this type of design exploration?
Yeah, that's a 5 question in one.
Yeah.
Again, the methods, basically the exercise varies. We can have very express session, which is of course always trade-off, the depth versus sort of a speed. There are like 1 day, 3 day workshops, and so on. That's basically kind of, but it's not only workshop, it's a preparation. As soon as we talk about programs, that's not only a series of workshops, like one workshop and then kind of making offline. Like average would, I say, 3 months, sometimes to half a year, but it's not full-time half a year. It's also very important that people do it in parallel. They keep doing the other work, but just kind of keep working on the programs. That's, of course, you could expect that's kind of what the green light from the company is. That in the beginning, it's first of all to get this green light to make this exercise, because it's an investment from the company, not only because they it's a payment and so on, but because they have to free people. They have to let people work on these things. So that's it's a good for one workshop, for 2 days workshop, but I would say you have to be continuously working over time. That creates lots of barriers. Officially, they may be agreeing, but unofficially, people swamped again and kind of dragged into the thing. So that's a battle. It's for every project. It's a bit of a, the tensions.
Okay. Well, there are a few questions more, but maybe it's good to now switch to the Miro board, and maybe we can address those questions later on.
Yep. So that's basically, I send you the link. Now I have to explain this. If you are very familiar with this mirror, so you could, each of you can jump to this board and see what will happening. So I will be actually showing this mirror board also on a screen. So if you know nothing about mirror and kind of not feeling comfortable, you could basically stay and see what I will be showing. If you want to be present, you could jump in and also kind of, participate. We make it relatively intact, like protective, so you shouldn't destroy everything there, but you may. It's a bit of a, oops, I have to switch it. No, I have to jump now. So, well, again, this will be, I will be showing these things to you, and I hope you see this mirror board. Some of you see it from the screen, as I see, some of you seeing from inside. So you basically listen to me, and I will be talking. If you're on a mirror board, you don't see my screen. So eventually I will be putting different sort of stages of the process, but listen to where I am. So right now you see full view, like it's a full panorama of like typical session. Basically, we kind of represented every step, every stage, which is by now familiar to you, step of the future probing process, only it's kind of represented or emulated in this future board. What future boards are allowed, but you see on your screen for those who could stay with me, it's basically very, very easy, sort of almost like zoomable, right? Like you see overview, I can actually zoom to very, very small details, so every picture is becoming, very detailed. It's not the future of, it's not the feature of future probing. It's a great feature of Mira. So I'm not working for Mira, and I'm not advertising it, but it's we kind of benefiting it massively from this things. So basically, the first stage of the process, and I maybe not mention it because it may look like very self-evident for you, we spend some kind of effort to shape the team. Sometimes the teams are obvious. It's at stage number 1 here. When we start the session, we also participants introduce themselves, but also what we try to do is sort of create a certain identity. Who are you? What your team? What is your dolphin right now? In the companies, it may be easy because the teams are usually present as a team, which is actually not always the case, because I kind of preempting some questions, who is participating in these things. We try to bring broader representation, so people not only from classical strategy teams or innovation teams, we try to include broader amount of people, sort of from different divisions, from different sort of even functional levels, like from senior to junior levels and so on. And often these people never met each other in the company, so that actually shaping them in somewhat working team is actually task itself, because we believe if it's not done, the workshop is becoming just yet another sort of exercise and strange tool. You don't have like what Taleb said, you don't have a skin in the game. So we try to create this skin. What's your interest in this exercise? The second stage is, I maybe not, when I mentioned this example of that by now you're familiar with the future signal, it's something exceptional, but exceptional from what? So you have to also know the norm. What is now common sense? What is mainstream in the industry, and so on. For the core domains, we usually rely on people's knowledge, on the team knowledge. They're supposed to know the industry, and then they know what's mainstream, what exceptional. We are often surprised how little they know about their own industry. In this particular case, we kind of put in the center this new energy. So you see new energy, like new clean energy. So see examples of this. I'm now zooming into this sort of, it's a backgrounder, what we roughly know. It's usually more detailed than number of pictures, but we try to explicitly formulate what is we consider mainstream and what is exceptional. Usually done, it's in combination. When we start analyzing the signals, people say no, but it's not exceptional. That's actually mainstream. That's also how we populate this sort of a domain. But sort of the bigger one, this whole blue area, that's sort of those signal analysis. You could see here 3 hexagrams. They each represent 3 different domains. And those people who are in the boards, we're now in a blue blue hexagram, the first one. That's basically the domain of clean energy, which is I was also briefly presenting. You see here, for you, it's now pictures. That's basically future signals, and usually future signal, it's, as I said, a description of the process. The mirror board allows you to, I'm now zooming in the first signals, this sort of a harvesting energy. It's actually not just a picture, it's also a document. So people can read, I hope it's basically short document, kind of a quick description of the process. So what's happening, usually people read these things, like one person, one signal, and they try to think what is strange, what is unusual, what exactly the qualities of that. So basically there's kind of a task of deconstructing it. And the mirror board allows it to do it very efficiently, because people can simply type. I already started to type here, this white lines, it's already kind of beginning. But if you come through that, and those people who kind of participated, they can say, from the signals, oh, but I think this is different. So mirror board allows very, very quickly, you know, add something. So you could see immediately. So in this particular harvesting from this strange turbine that basically allows harvesting energy from wind from blowing from every direction. That's very unusual. It's very kind of a talented engineering solution. So that would be then, okay, I would see from this sort of can capture wind, but also interestingly, it's very mobile. I can place it in every place in a city, even in the building. So it's a kind of mobile energy harvesting. So you can see I'm now typing. So that's basically becoming my sort of idea, and that's becoming collaborative brainstorm. So there's analysis happening for every signal. When they analyze one by one altogether, so we then start looking for those sort of, as I mentioned, kind of strange things. So it's not about they're all about energy. So it's not about the commonalities in this sense. It's commonalities of the unusual. Now, that's exactly the sort of things it's difficult to emulate, because you better know all the signals, and when it goes through all your things, it's exactly those brain melting activity, which is tough, but also very useful, because exactly all this cross-firing happening in your brain or your collective brain. Somebody started mentioning, oh, by the way, this signal is similar to this one. Another one I'm showing you, this PaveGen. It's an entirely different technology. It's kind of piezoelectric that you could put the pavement and it starts capturing energy. But that itself, it's interesting. You could make lots of interesting sort of combination, but somehow there's a bit of a similarity of this between this one and this one I showed you, this energy harvesting, almost exactly the same, sort of this capacity to put it at any place and start harvesting, micro harvesting energy from any location. That's strange similarities, the sort of the capacity of this project. And that basically goes to something of this sort, goes to the sort of, as we kind of collecting those in a central. I actually can also kind of physically connect them. So you could see here kind of appearing these things. So again, the mirror board is allowing this to do it very visually, very clearly. So basically I'm connecting these things and I spotted those qualities. So that's the kind of nature of the job. Now, if you're in the board, you could read more signals or try to play to types and so on, maybe your first reaction. So it's also kind of a quite spontaneous. And as I said, it's a combination of the immediate, like we all together now working on the board, but imagine we finish today, you come tomorrow, and then you could add a few thoughts, right? So you could add another example and so on. So it's kind of an unfolding things, evolving things. And it's very good because people actually, you may most likely know that people have different sort of, you know, affinities. Some people like to do spontaneously when a group discussion, some people kind of individual thinkers. And so we can combine these things. So some people express immediately in a group discussion, some people like to, you know, sleep over and add tomorrow. And this tool allows it to do very, very efficiently. So when this domain is finished, for example, the first one, we go, in this particular case, our second domain was now moving to the yellow hexagram. That's adjacent domain, as we discussed. It's not only about energy. In this particular project, the company was interested in energy for spaces like public buildings, for example, public offices. So it's not any energy, it's energy kind of specific application domain. So we kind of took this domain of what's happening in the spaces in a sort of well, smart spaces, offices, buildings, and so on. So again, we start from sort of a, I'm now zooming into this area of backgrounder, what kind of your common things, what is now common mainstream, both in terms of technologies, but also maybe common ideas, kind of common concept frameworks, for example. This Internet of Things will be typically popping up here. But then the actual the main, actual signals could be, again, the same logic. They're kind of unusual. Some of them would be maybe following more kind of, mainstream. Like one of the signals I'm now showing, it's a building of the TUE, the smart building of the Technical University of Eindhoven, which is now famous for this sort of smart regulation of the climate and electricity and so on, kind of very sustainable. But some others we found a bit more bizarre. It's sort of the Sony project, for example, was creating kind of a sensorial bubbles. Like in the space, they create kind of microspace within the space. And this was another project for creating kind of a strange bubbles, but they're kind of connected to the outside world. So they're almost like in sync. It's a kind of microspace, but in sync with outside world. Again, I'm describing in a very, very quickly. And as I mentioned, behind each of this, it's a more detailed description. But in following the same logic, we could say, oh yeah, but this between these two projects, between the Sony and Sony, there's some kind of similarity. This sort of interesting feature of this entirely differently designed. There was a physical bubble, and Sony was a kind of sensorial, sort of more augmented multimedia bubble they created around you. But this sort of creating this space within the space, like a really bubble, was interesting. So again, I can mention this as a possible candidate. Sort of the space inside space, or bubble space kind of thing. As I mentioned here, without this discussion, the expression like bubble space means nothing for any outsider. But because if we would go through all the signals, you immediately know what is related to. So all your insights becoming kind of grounded. You always can track them back and say, what do you mean here? But I'm connecting, I meant that. Somebody can suggest better naming, it's okay, so you could refine this, like more accurate wordings, like less cliche, less sort of banality and so on. So that's also, we collaboratively discuss those sort of, or develop those signals. And the final one will be about the social practices. Well, maybe again, in some ways specifically related to the sort of sustainable energy practices, but also in this particular project was more like new types of identity formation, how people shape their identity, especially identity through the new mediums, for example. So it was a bit of a complex kind of configuration of the things. But as a backgrounder, well, we're supposed to, which is now, that's kind of current practices, what we know the world as it is, like those sort of existing things. But then we see again why we consider something exceptional, and this is discussion also very, very usually hot. Why it's exceptional? For somebody it's already normal, for somebody it's still far away, and it's bizarre and not accepted, and so on. So that's usually very interesting discussion happening in this social context practices. But again, just to complete this sort of arc, we found a couple of examples. One was sort of robotic priests, when people were mediating their sort of religious practices, sort of machines, such as a robot who also read the Bible, which is a bit of a strange sort of for, you don't expect it, but it's maybe happening again, the kind of possible signals. And this was from Japan, this example of the sort of blended identity with a virtual avatar who's also performing together with real person, and it's becoming kind of a blended sort of a figure. So that's a typical example of this blended identity with combining physical and virtual and real. So again, this possible connection. I'm just very quickly running through. And then the next step, as I said, we kind of try to combine all these three uncombinable. I mentioned you the sort of those strange, I'm now moving back to the sort of mobile harvesting. So I can take this and bring this to this domain when we analyze here. Yeah, so that, and then basically we kind of repopulating this space and start thinking or reflecting with this sort of three domains. So if you remember, I was picking up something like this. I think I didn't write this bubble, and yeah, I was right here. Yeah. This bubble space, and then so you see basically how I'm working. It's drag and drop, very, very easy, and yeah, for the lack of better words, I would say kind of mediated identity, I would call it here, but again. So in a way, you could say immediately there's nothing kind of common between the things. So you could think like, what's so common between the three realities? And if you struggle, again, you don't have to aim always at one which is combine everything possible. It's maybe some you could, go back and see what exactly you mean by modified identity, and then come back to then sort of refine your search again. Ideally, you find like one or two interesting qualities, and it's enough for this exercise to start with. As I said, it's often not easy to formulate it very quickly and very elegantly. Sometimes lots of people are not native in English, for example. So we can help often through metaphorical sort of images. For example, we actually struggle with this particular topic and theme, and somebody suggested, but yeah, it's a kind of resemble this like bubbles. It's a world where basically autonomous bubbles, each with its own identity and its own sort of energy regime. Sort of each of these bubbles have its own kind of fundamental changeable identity, but also changeable sort of energy harvesting, energy consumption, and so on. It's very different from how we do it now. So that's becoming, and these things together with sort of knowledge and formulation became inspiration for this sort of future world. What if this sort of bubbled world will become mainstream? What will happen? How it will change everything, infrastructure, businesses, education, and so on. That was exercise in sort of imagination. In case of, you remember this in my previous sort of explanation, we provide the kind of physical building blocks to do that. Now we don't have physical blocks, so we provide kind of those sort of drawing blocks. And by the way, Mira allows you to do like very easily to like multiple shapes. For example, I can drop this like very easily. These things I can color them. So basically, the basic toolkits are very easily available. So they could be colorful, they could be playful, and so on. You could also draw here. So if somebody, for example, you're drawing, you could draw something, or you could draw somewhere else and upload it here. So basically, it's a collectively assembling the world. So yeah, this basically exactly what is happening. Right? So people adding, and I can mod more. I can change the sort of the color of the things, and I can add more things. So that's a collective brainstorm through physical exercise. You could also bring the appropriate sort of object. We put here the same kind of ambiguous figures, some objects, some these things. For example, I can bring this and say what if this world will be this multiple. So I'm kind of I'm not just having to make this copy. Yeah, so I'm kind of copying this. Multiple bubbles. I can populate the whole world with them and see how it will. Yeah, we also put people here, like basically drawing a figurines, so on, so on, so on. So that's the same logic. We create this world. It's a bit of a playful, bit of a silly, but it's not the world itself. It's what we talk about this. And by the way, when we run the mirror boards, we can often do exactly the same way. Mira has this capacity to have an audio channel, so we can also talk and draw. So you see that's, yeah, Frauk is doing the same things. So it's not only kind of this abstract, so I see designers, they start playing, good. When it's done, we also kind of encourage people to think more holistically, making connections, like you build one object, how it will impact this quality of the world, and so on. I can show you, we have this sort of a, like guides or guidelines, but think further, think about this questions. What's for example, what will be entertaining, what's the news, how people will make jokes in this world, what will be funny in this world. So it's not only functional, properties on this world, but kind of we really try to make holistic world and help people to make this world. So yeah, that's creativity unleashed. Somewhere beneath, I can show you we put a couple of examples. That's a typical things. From on the left side, you see more rational. People make description of this world, basically stories like short and so on. And the right one is more kind of creative. Really, people build a new planet, populated and so on. So that's an essence of that. And that's from, again, the logic the same. When the world is built, it could be silly in the beginning, but for people, it allows to immerse themselves in this future, and from this future you start thinking what the probes, and the same logic. You create artifacts. Some of them could be already created in this things like new object and new interfaces and so on. Sometimes it's a story, sometimes a description of activities, and you basically extract from this exercise exactly that. If you have ideas about the future probes, ideas about the future world, and future probes. So in a nutshell, that's kind of emulation of the same process, but entirely in a virtual world. A virtual world.
Great.
So I'm kind of done.
Thank you. It's very inspiring.
Sorry?
Yeah, it's very inspiring to see how you go, how you did this.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I hope
thank you, Slava, for organizing and presenting and showing us your method through Miro. I enjoyed it very much. I think it was very inspiring, and looking at the reactions, I think the audience also liked it a lot. So once again, thank you very much. Maybe sometime, well, some other time we'll meet again.
Yeah, sure.
And for now, to everyone, have a nice evening, and thank you for joining.
See you.